Bonsoir.
Good afternoon, everyone. We shall now begin. My name is Cesare Casati, and I'm the director of Arcadata Architecture. Excuse my accent, I am Italian, and normally I would speak English, but I'm speaking in the language of this country. So this afternoon we have 4 architects, great professionals that represent long experience in terms of projects and from differing backgrounds. Now, as far as the topic is concerned, it's architectural iconics, and of course you think of iconic architecture for the past, in terms of the past, and we have to connect the various languages of architecture over the centuries, and we're not totally freed up from a very classical type of language in terms of architecture. And all of the parallelisms in terms of volume and mirror effect. But the problem that we are faced with today when you talk about iconics is what's happening in our present century, this new century that is opening up the doors to future centuries. And this effort is still a very shy one, and it is linked to the development of urban development and urban societies. Of course, I'm talking about city life. And of course, here, these gentlemen to my left, I'm here actually to play the devil's advocate with them a bit. And I must say that now there is no longer the capacity or the will, these huge contractors that actually commission architects, as before, for example, in Brasilia, they did that for the entire city. But now cities develop in pieces, in parts, and through attempts to find a certain identity, they look for their identities in these new icons. They have wonderful projects, great designs, a little bit bizarre at times, but all tied in with the new technologies. But this is, of course, all very closely linked to design. As you can see here at this MIPIM conference, there are huge scale models of entire cities. But of course, it's all beautiful to see. But of course, these are just scale models. And of course, you go from Singapore to Moscow at a conference like this. Nothing really changes. But you're talking about urban identities. And it's not linked to a building, it's linked to an organization of life and lifestyle. And above all, for developing a city, we have to free ourselves of the attitudes that we all have of having individual aspects in the city. We have, for example, we have to free up from, this individual aspect. We have to become more social. We actually are capable of building huge ships that can carry 5,000 people across the seas. and everyone can go about their own business without creating any problems for anyone else, and they leave a lot of the space around themselves free. And I think this is what I'm going to invite our friends here to speak of, to think of the way that history, has concentrated itself in terms of nature, each individual being within the natural environment. But that's finding the rapport between the natural environment and the city. If it can be mixed, of course, you can. If you put little, forest right into the city, and then you can transform the forest itself to a huge ensemble of tiny houses and shapes and forms that are just terrible. So we have to know that each one of us can develop our work and our methods as we wish. I would like to invite Mr. Roland Castro, first of all, to speak. He is a real urban builder, and I think in his experience is really working a lot in the urban environment. So I would like to know if in future there would be a possibility to redesign or to rethink, have another thought process for the ensemble, which is the city. So the floor is yours, sir. Yeah, well, actually, I am a little bothered here because people are telling me that, yes, there's going to be some pictures above your head, and yes, I do see them going by in front of me here. I try not to look at the pictures, because we're going to be talking about the city, but with this question, is it going to become like a common or a shared project? Because, the history of towns and cities is that they are built in a very homogeneous manner, continuous, with a lot of meaning in the form of despotism. Actually, the last one that we know is in Paris, the despotism of Napoleon III, and the Haussmann plan, which still works, but it's true that, following despotism, the only democratic city that we really know, which is the modern movement, is catastrophic. This is the modern movement, and of course we think of the town in terms of the person who actually lives in it. Of course you need air, sunshine, light for everyone. Of course, that's the whole thought process of urban living, which of course is the Corbusier, the intellectual catastrophe, which was the Corbusier thinking. And this, of course, it can be shared, it can be efficient, and does seem to work, and actually works a little better than in the warmer countries, because I don't know why, because it works better in tropical countries, but actually is a huge massacre for urban continuity and the very idea of living in the city. And of course this is shared. Everybody loves it. The ideas are very simple. And of course, of today, yes, you say, okay, yes, sunlight, etc. Yes, everybody says yes. Ecology, yes, everybody says yes. And this slogan that doesn't, if there's no figuration to it, in France, it takes the form of the ensemble as a whole, and this is just horrible because it's the decor. It's not the decor that produces all this the miserable effect, but actually it's usually the most in need that end up living in those areas. And so it's the most in need that have found this decor. But so the practice is shared. Any ordinary politician, can set this down. It really produces an urban catastrophe. And when you look at the history of France, let's be precise, I'm just talking about urban history, but let's talk about France in particular. Of course, in the archipelago, he says that France has the measure of space, of course, which built not only Versailles, but also St. Petersburg, and Haussmann, who really had this French urban thought process. And of course, it was wonderful in the history of urban France. And of course, in France, there was this wonderful urban history. And obviously, the modern movement, on the contrary, has become even more insupportable. And so this is what we can say as of 1968 in France. We actually de-built the modern movement, or unbuilt it. But we did it on a small scale, and then you see all these pictures. You see this old tower, and then you see a modern building. And so we actually unbuilt the modern movement, and then we did come back right to the city and to the idea of the joys of buildings touching each other, or that it's not just the fact that sunshine actually comes down upon it. And so this has been done in little fragments. But it was done. But then there was another avatar, which was the look. In the 1980s, for example, there was the imagery of architecture that came in. Apparently there's you don't see the building in its own environment, you just see the image, the picture of a building, that's all. And so it's the picture that counts, that's all. And actually we don't even check up on it. We actually give a price on the picture. And one day I went out to check it out, just to see. And it's true, some buildings even look kind of sexy, to look at it in a picture. But when we started building this modern movement, this huge avatar, it was actually the architectural was actually a reason through its look, the aspect, the appearance. And more or less, we have the idea that it's just gone down the drain. So, some politicians even say, cities are just really in the mud, and we're going to have to do something about this. Well, I don't think that it has gone down the drain. I think it's, what's really wrong with it? Well, the despotism, that's fine. There's no hope, thank God, that the despotic form will be reborn in today's cities, so that's good. But there's also no fatality that it should lead to the bureaucratic management of cities either. So, and I'm just going to finish because, I only see all these pictures going by of my work, and I think that's absurd. But I think that it's really relevant that what the unbuilding of, or the breaking down of the modern movement, of course, with architects that just hate thinking, there was a sinister moment in architecture. The idea that there was an architectural regression just really drives architects out of their mind. There is a dramatic history and dramatic background, which is the modern movement. It's just horrible, but architects don't like it when you say that. Well, I'm just saying, architects, they don't like this moment, of in the city's history. So if we look at what's in fashion, and the look. Really, and you're doing it on commission, so maybe the look is just a stupid thing, but it's the status of the look that really counts at the time, and so that didn't really work very well either. So what really happened with the Grand Paris, the Greater Paris project, of course, a lot of intellectuals, not just architects, worked on this urban consistency and coherence, the question of everyone living together. For example, we had 500 intellectuals working in teams of 50 together, and we saw people with oversized egos, and we saw people, at war with each other. Well, let's say, like, for example, Berliners, or for people who hated Rome, for example. Bernard and the other guy. Who is the other? The one who did the round church, and the other one who did it oval church. Oh, never mind. I'm just kidding anyway. But, for the Greater Paris project and the work of 10 teams, there were a lot of shared points amongst these people, who actually usually are just bickering with each other on certain points. There was the idea of intensity, capacity, and the idea of let's stop with this extensive city and let's go into intensive. Then we had the feeling that the design of the city, because the Greater Paris, that's about 40, or about, let's say it's 40 kilometers per 40, but we had this feeling that we could, at the scale of this large metropolitan area, is to create this shared idea of sharing urbanity, if you like. The multipolar aspect of the city was well shared as well. And of course that it was a great time to finish with urban apartheid, so to speak, has come. And of course the dignity of every single person inhabiting the city was also a shared idea. And so my feeling is that democracy and the democratic form can actually take hold of urban societies and design. And when we look at when architects work much more on urban projects with members of parliament or elected representatives, who work with them, they actually share a lot of it. Urban planners now actually we're starting to create urban planners who really care about urban living. And I can convince my teams, for example, to build a little tower with a suspended garden, for example, in Gennevilliers. We found a method. It was just a small point, but it was important. We were able to, in a democratic manner, build participative teaching and learning. And we were able to find a means by which the inhabitants could share their ideas with the creator, with the designers. And but I think that it's on a larger scale, on a broader scale, that we should look at this and put it to work. So I think that, learning along with the public in urban planning, I think it could be possible to imagine that the city once again become a controllable and manageable place. Something that doesn't really slip through our fingers, that's too much for us to handle. Of course, I have spoken way too much, but very quickly, there is no reason whatsoever other than just a terrible mental laziness or just a lethargy because it's the air du temps. Or, of course, you have to cut the space into pieces because of administrative constraints, etc. But actually, I think we can no longer say that city planning and city living is unmanageable. I think it is manageable. I think there are huge, policies, extremely major policies to be taken. And the dignity of the inhabitants is not just a question of the cherry on the cake, but on the contrary, it's the cherry that enables us to build or to bake the cake. So, yes, I know I have spoken too much, but I think it's absolutely possible now. It's within the next 20 years that we have in front of us to see whether it's going to work or not. Yes, thank you very much. And now I would like to hear the idea of this problem. And here we spoke of the democratic aspect, to participate democratically in the city projects so that the public can participate in the design process. Now, Professor van Berkel, who comes from the Netherlands, of course, it's now the turn of the Netherlands to give us a lesson in a certain language, and we know that all of the Dutch architects are wonderful and they know that they are working on a regionalism point of view. What do you think in terms of city planning?
Yes, thank you. As a Dutch architect with UNStudio, we have not only work in Holland. So it's I can refer to Holland, and as a Dutch architect, I can refer to the question you ask me. But in the same time, I can only react as an architect who operates lately also. Or not only lately, but over the last 10 years, also quite international. I have some slides. I go briefly through them. The question we have asked ourselves over so many years is, what is architecture for us today, of course, and what is urban planning for us today? We have believed that it is far more interesting not to only look at the image of an architecture alone, or the image of urban qualities we produce in the city alone. I mean, I'd like to say, of course, we have the talent and maybe also the ambition to make a recognizable and an understandable quality of architecture, but in the same time, we are far more interested in the way how we organize our cities. And I'd like to bring up not a Dutch project, but maybe a project what is connected to a little bit the Dutch, and that is the city of New York. And the first image what you see here is connected to that idea of how New York, in the time when all the goods were coming into the city, through the piers on the edge of the city, were connected to the grid of Manhattan. And you know that for a long time this grid was one of the most beautiful aspects of this city, because it combined the aspects of goods, consumption, production and high finance to be well organized within this city. Only we know that since the piers of the edge of Manhattan disappeared, a lot of changes occurred in the city. So the changes of the city were introduced by the way how then the edges of Manhattan were not so well operating anymore, as we know. Luckily enough, it is restorated and renovated, but still, if we go to a location like the Grand Central Station or the Penn Station, you discover that if you step out of the station in the night, maybe you have been to the Madison Square Garden, that then nothing is happening within the whole city, in that part of the city. Sorry. So what is the problem is that through the changes of the edge of this part of the city, the consumption and the production and the high finance and the way how the liveliness on the area of certain parts of the city are not then operating anymore as we always thought we had planned this part of the city. Anyway, our argument is how do we rethink these contemporary questions of the cities and these contemporary problems of the city. So we believe that it's important to rethink the way how we visualize these problems. And the image what you see right now here gives clearly the way how around certain parts of the city here, how people come into, for instance, the two stations, Penn Station and the Grand Central Station, and how they connected to the program around the city. And the way how we have been dealing with this is that we ask the city. I think, you know, maybe we should just have a pause, otherwise, I mean, technical questions are always the major part of designing projects. But anyway, here, technology helps. The question we raise is then how do we visualize these problems? As you can see in this image, we visualize statistics. We bring that to the politicians of the city, we bring that to the urban planning departments of the city, and what we discover is that they generate an enormous amount of new insight of the way how we can plan cities. So often we bring these, what we call the parameters of the city together. Where are the user groups to be found in the city? Who are the tourists, the residents? Where are the business people? What kind of infrastructure do they use? How are they connected to the public spaces within the city? How are they connected to clockwise using the city? Because, as we know, if we want to plan the future of the city in a sustainable way, then we cannot locate or housing in one location anymore, because then we know that people will still go to the center, use the infrastructure too intensely in such a way that the liveliness is not concentrated in the city. So we rethink all these qualities of the way how people are using the city in such a manner that they don't use constantly only the infrastructure and are so combined that the activities around living, working and sleeping are combined in one area. So if we want to plan the future of the city, then it needs to be connected to the way how people move and operate within the instrument of the city. And similarly, I would like to say, if we look at our buildings, of course we'd like to still think of that buildings can be iconographic, but they should not be designed as iconographic buildings, because we know that icons grow over time. A building cannot be from one day to the other an icon, because people will have to celebrate the icon, or they need to like it, or they might hate the icon. So an icon will never be able to be designed. So we have to think more about what is the meaning of the architecture we produce and what is the quality of the architecture we want to embrace in order to become successful. And like I said, it can only be successful there where it is collaborating with all the policies of the city and the public intentions of the city. But in the same time, it needs to have a future-oriented ambition to think about its not only sustainable, but also its affordable and attainable quality we would like to give to our buildings. The project I'm going to briefly show to you is a project we showed, we designed in Seoul. It's arguing here that branding a building is not really the future. alone. So like on the left-hand side, you see where on Times Square all the brands are trying to compete with each other. We argued, why could not a building be having one image and one almost cultural quality, whereby you say that this could become a part of the city where it's a lamp for the city, so that it becomes a more recognizable LED lit instead of wasting energy facade with all the brands on it, and by that becomes a recognizable social entity within the city where people could meet, even when it is a department store. So if we make architecture, like in this image, and things come together in a form or in the organization of the architecture, it is about how people meet and how they come together. Even if color is used, it is there where it needs to orient the people within the city or within the architecture itself. So like maybe in an image like this, we don't want to think always so literally about the way how we stack floors on top of each other, and whereby you recognize there where you move from one part to the next part of the building as a building what you enjoy to be, let's say, a museum or a cultural center, or maybe when it is even a commercial center alone. We'd like to have something more, what gives more meaning to the architecture, in order to bring people back to the architecture. And this is what I believe is the future of architecture. It's not about images alone, it's more about after images, so that you'd like to come back to the architecture and that it generates a future. A project I briefly want to show is this project in China. As Dutchmen, we have been heavily involved in many urban projects in Singapore, Asia, in general. I would like to say from China to Taiwan and other locations, simply because maybe we, as being in a dense location, dense country, we learned so much about the densification of the way how you can group programs. Like this is a site of 500,000 square meters where everything is almost happening. From hotels to working places, housing, shopping, cultural activities. And this project is designed again by new techniques. And this is why we believe in new production techniques are the future of architecture, but also the new design techniques need to be collaborating with it in order to make an architecture sustainable. Like, for instance, in this project, this client wants to be having here a project what is the best sustainable project to be found in China, and we have that lately discovered in every country we work, like even in places where you don't expect, like China, we didn't expect that they want to be so ambitious on the level of sustainable ideas, and from bringing the construction in the project, what needs to be highly efficient, because you can imagine if you have 6 programs on top of each other, that the construction needs to be highly flexible, so that housing could be turned into offices and offices can be turned into housing. That is actually lately the questions we get from our clients. Even we built it already 2 projects in Holland where offices can be turned into housing, because we have 1 million square meters of empty office spaces in Holland. And sometimes then we do these smaller projects in order to test production techniques, in order to play with the idea of the public space and how that became turned into a series of models where then we use this as a testing ground for how we can then apply that to our urban ideas of the way how you can make new public constructs in the city. And I briefly like to keep it here because I can talk endlessly about what and how many projects we have built, but I'd like to explain here more the process of design and how the future of architecture will have to deal with its question of the attainable and sustainable quality we are after. Thank you so much.
Merci. Oui, mais je vais demander à Grenwood, qui vient de la Norvège, du Nord.
Yes, thank you very much. But I'm going to ask Mr. Green, who comes from Norway, who also has very strong ideas on architectural identity. Now, for this question of iconic architecture, you know, there's a monumental aspect, a singular aspect of the object and the image, or should the city itself be an icon or an image for Venice, for example? Venice has a lot of buildings.
Thank you, MIPIM. Snohetta, we come from Oslo, Norway. We don't really have a lot of icons in Norway. We're a long way away. On the screen here, this is our icon. This is our mountain. It's the Snohetta mountain. I'm not Mr. Snohetta. Our office has its own icon, and it's this mountain. You know, people do need icons. It's an emotional requirement. We need things to connect meaning, content, and emotions to. So for us, it's the mountain. We don't use people's names because people come and go, but mountains, they stay. I'm going to show you some of our projects that have actually become, I think, icons. Some that may become icons. Maybe some that really aren't icons. Alexandria was now 20 years ago. We won the competition for designing the new library of Alexandria. Quite a strange thing to win a competition, just as a student, to design, actually to build a myth. I mean, or the library of Alexandria, how do you visualize something that is in everyone's mind as a myth? Very difficult. This was our story, the past, the present, the future. It was a section of the building. It's very nice to go back there now, and there's some very nice guides who take you around the library. And they all have different stories about that library, why it looks like it does, how it looks like it does. Some say it's the sun god Ra, some say it's the computer chip, all sorts of different stories. I think if your building can connect to people and people can tell different stories about your building, then you're starting to connect to the emotional content of that city, of that place, at that time. I totally agree with Ben that you can't design icons. In my office in Oslo, I get a fax just about every week from, I'm sure, maybe some people in this room here today, asking us if we can design a landmark and an icon for them somewhere in the world. Very nice. I hope the faxes still keep coming. I always reply. But of course, the answer is architects cannot design icons. People design icons. People create icons, not architects. It's only if the building in some way connects to the emotional state of the society you're working within, does that building become an icon. I think in Alexandria we became an icon. Maybe we became an icon, we were 10 years, 20 years before the revolution that happened just 3 weeks ago. I think many of the things that this library was talking about, being an open space, being a space where men can meet women, being a space where you can read the Quran next to someone who might be reading Salman Rushdie. This is probably the sort of space that the people of Egypt, the young people of Egypt, really wanted in their city. These pictures are taken just 2 weeks ago when the demonstrations were going on in Alexandria, and where, amazingly enough, the library has become a free space for everybody, for the crowds to pray. They're not praying to the library, they're praying to Mecca, but they're choosing to do it next to the library. I think if your building can meet the people of the city, then they become icons. But you can't design it. You can't design an icon. You can't order an icon. You might get one. Some icons come and go. This is our building in the Serpentine Gallery in London. It's only put up for the summer and then gets taken down, and then next year they put up a new one. So in a way, our building is an icon even though it doesn't exist anymore. If you go to London, you won't find it. You'll find some other person's pavilion. Maybe Ben's got one there, I don't know. So the icon doesn't really have to necessarily still exist. It can be a memory of icon. Another little icon in a small city in Norway, it's for a jazz pavilion as a tent, and it gets put up once a year for their jazz festival. So it's the expectation of an icon. Something's going to happen. If you go to that city, you won't find it there. But everyone who lives there knows that it's going to come up in the summer. It's their icon, but it's not always there. Size doesn't matter when it comes to icons. This is our smallest project. We have a whole bunch of these small projects in the back gardens of Oslo. This is for a drinking fountain for an old lady's cat. Now, maybe in Oslo, the old lady's cat's drinking fountain is the icon. One of the most difficult projects we've done recently is for the mayor of Mecca. And he lives in a city with the biggest icon in the world. Big in terms of metaphysically big. It's actually quite small, the Kaaba. But he wanted us to design a library of the Holy Mosque next door to the Kaaba. An amazingly difficult project. How do you design an icon for the icon? Also in a city where you can't ever go and see it because you have to take the red lane and not the green lane. So the Kaaba is really very, very small. It's maybe 15 meters by 15 meters.
Kaaba.
Our building next to it is also going to be an icon. How do you build an icon next to the biggest icon? Well, maybe one way you can engage with people, engage with the society and the culture, is to work more with artists. All our projects, we work with artists. This is Dr. Ahmed Mustafa. He's a calligrapher, lives in London. I think if you work with artists, then you maybe manage to get an emotional content into your buildings that just architects, technicians can't do alone. So we worked with his calligraphy, his way of moving the pen across the page to create a three-dimensional calligraphy, the sort of calligraphy he has in his mind, and then to create a facade and a new icon that will maybe someday sit around the real icon, which is the Kaaba. A bit like a satellite, a bit like a planet. That's our client. Osama bin Laden is his brother. And the next project I'll show you is our work in New York for a site that is intimately connected with his brother's work. How do you create an icon in a place where you have thousands of icons all around you? That's one of our first little sketches. We were supposed to build a museum on the site of the Ground Zero site. All these other architects, SOM, IMPI, Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, Calatrava, Richard Rogers, Marquis Libeskind, they're all building their icons around our little building, which I think will also become an icon, but I don't know yet, it's not finished. But of course the biggest icon of them all is the negative space, the empty space, the footprints of the Twin Towers. That's the real icon. So how can an architect actually build an icon next to the huge negative icon? Well, that's still under construction, so I won't actually go into too much detail on that. Maybe it will be finished in a year's time, and you can all go and see if it really has become an icon. For those of you who can speak Norwegian, you'll know what this says. It says, "Shit on the health queue, build an opera." We don't usually get graffiti artists supporting our projects. But very nice to know that somebody really wanted an emotional content in his city rather than a shorter health queue. Norway is a social democratic place. We don't like elitist culture. We don't like elitist icons. We don't really like the opera. So to build a new opera in Oslo means you've got to actually really make a place for the people, make a place where the citizens of Oslo can take part in that building that they perceive as elitist and impregnable institution. So our take on that was to put the plaza of the opera on the roof of the opera itself, so that the opera becomes a space for people. So that the citizens of Oslo can all take their Sunday walks onto the roof. They climb on the roof as if it was a mountain, as if it's going for a walk in the park. They can cook their sausages in there. They can do whatever they want in there. There's a big blog of all the things you can do on the roof of the Oslo Opera, and there's an awful lot of things you can do on the roof. And it's become loved. People love the opera in Oslo. I don't know if they really love the opera, but they love going to the opera. If you now come to Oslo, you won't be able to get a ticket because they're all sold out. It's a place for a lot of people, maybe a place for just a few people, or sometimes an awful lot of people. This is 7,000 people watching a simultaneous performance, inside, outside. You know, if you can walk on something, if you can jump up and down on it, and you can touch it, then you own it. So becoming an icon maybe is a little bit about giving ownership to the people. It's also a place for parties, a place for Angela Merkel, and you can do all sorts of things on the roof. that we didn't think you could do, but the people have found out you really can do. This is a Frenchman. So, thank you very much. I think if you're going to create a space for people now, today, architecture now, and what we're going to do in the future, it has to be interactive. It has to be a space, a place, or a building that people can interact with, can feel that they own, and that they can take part in. And if you do that, you might get an icon. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Et compliment pour l'opéra. Jacques Ferrier.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the opera.
Est-ce que tu penses, si
now,
on doit
do you think that if we continue to individualize good architecture through separate objects or separate buildings of different types with different typologies? For example, you know, are these icons that will be building for the future and that will recognize, for example, the Oslo Opera? Or should we, another responsibility of architects, should we actually, as an icon, should it be the city, the whole ensemble of architecture? Is that what the icon, or should we actually entertain the idea of emptiness and not build? Well, it's a difficult question because that raises the question of what is the city today? And the problem is, you know, as Roland said, well, of course, the Haussmann project in Paris or Barcelona or Manhattan, even in New York. These are cities that are no longer the cities that we actually work on today, or just exceptional projects here and there where we add or complete something or change something. But today is the city not something that actually expands very quickly like in Asia and India. And the dialectics between a monument or an icon and a city and urban stenography with respect to the juxtaposition of the monuments and buildings, you know, yes, it could be very clear. Yes, actually, I think the answer is in compromise. You need both. For example, the American cities that now become historic, I don't think that, you know, we're looking at it in these terms with the infinite extension of cities now, that actually these are topics that we have to deal with. We have to bring them up. And I also agree with everything that is being said. If no one can really accept today this dictatorship of the image of the icon and this gesture that the brand name brings, for example, like Vuitton bags or, you know, what are the, and this kind of is a different type of dynamics for the city. For example, something that does work is something like Bilbao, even if it's difficult in terms of image. For 15 kilometers, for example, from the center of Shanghai, if you go 15 kilometers from downtown, the building would be totally lost, and this would not solve the question of you know, what this urban world is, you know, with no qualities. And I'm just coming back to what Roland has just said, not through the despotism, through political power, but despotism, you know, let's say economically speaking, or efficiency and functionality. And of course, you know, we're actually pulling at it. Of course, when you look at China, there's 400 million Chinese that will be going from the countryside into the flow into the cities. And so this type of efficiency, you know, when you talk about iconic architecture, should actually be repositioned in this type of a context. Of course, I'll come back to Shanghai because we did the World Fair exhibit there. And so if you take the question backwards, because when you do a pavilion, then you do expect an icon. And of course, the culture of the people, you know, they want to know how it's built, how they live there and around it, and their own landscaping and context. Then you have to actually play the game of the image. You have to play images game and go beyond the project. You know, that isn't just the World Fair, but a prototype for the building. For example, for these cities where the nature areas and architecture that actually blends together, and so that the building could actually be seen as a structure because of its facade and the logo. It was the structure itself, but it should be. We wanted it to be seen as a garden as well. And so each building has to actually be the bearer of its own landscape. And now, iconically speaking, there's that strong and probably excessive pressure of ecology and environmental protation, etc. Here we're going, the Great Western Airport. Environmentally speaking, it's extremely intelligent because actually they want to take the airport away from the urban areas because of noise pollution and place the airports into unoccupied areas, and so that we, for example, to have in the western areas of France and Rennes and not in non-urban areas of France. So if we de-zoom the project, and it's different, but if you zoom in, then of course you have environmental organizations that are totally against it, of course, in these unoccupied areas. And so, in areas, that's why you have to treat the airport and handle it as a garden itself. And so as if it's just a shelter, of course, there's no change of levels, and you just have the airplane at the end of the runway. Even optically, it's the development in imagery. This is what we did for Euro Disney in France, in Marne-la-Vallée. And the question was being able to do a huge dome, these huge glass domes, where you have an artificial climate and isolated environment under these glass bubbles. And here we've changed the image or the picture as in the idea of the Oslo's opera. So it's a form that you can actually go up onto it, and there's a fusion between the image of the object that is the envelope and the object that actually becomes your own. And actually what you said about appropriating the building so that the big building becomes yours, and in the collective imagination, sharing with respect to how the people considered the monument, at a certain distance and, weren't too hot. And so here we try even to bring this idea to where you don't expect it at all, for example, in a recreation park. And that is actually taken as a counterexample of the city, which is an example that's like all set up. And of course, this is a project that we're doing with Gazo Paillard and Villiers, which is an urban project that actually eliminates the idea of infrastructure, because the train stations and the roadways can actually create their own landscaping. And here, I'm not going to be too long because I know we need time to conclude. But of course, I haven't talked about this. But the question of housing, which actually is what creates the greatest continuity, an aspect of continuity in a city. And so the modern movement that was mentioned before, and the idea that it was that we transformed, so that the idea that the housing program could also be an architectural program, and we risk, there's the risk of creating a counter meaning, because you risk actually overwhelming each person's personal universe. And if this is a Montpellier project, and the project is to actually create an identity, because with this type of project that a city actually builds itself, and we're trying to remain sufficiently permeable and permissive, even, I would say, so that the inhabitants be able to appropriate these different types of architectures. This is a parking lot. We worked with Ruby Moore here, and this is also an architectural project, a bridge. So bridges as well, quite a passionate question, how to create an image with a bridge, all the while complying with the construction and technical aspects. Yes, I think that we're almost done, so that would be for the next time. And now we're going to look at the problem of architects should think about tomorrow and a future without the future. That's a problem. Do you think that each problem, they spend mountains and mountains of money on their cities that are made for cars, lit for cars. The marking and the beaconing is for cars. And of course the icons, of course, are very useful for recognition of such and such a city, etc. But we still have to stay in the language or a method that links us with culture. So we're not going to continue filling up China, for example, with the same icons that we did in our own cities, and the language and aesthetics of our own country, our own culture. So of course, it doesn't mean anything to them. So. And of course, all of the trademarks and the great brands like a Ferrari car, for example. But it doesn't. They all buy it and they all go for it, but it doesn't belong to their culture. And so what about this icon for China? And so we're going to, it's food for thought. And of course now we're always talking about architecture and never really general problems, but we can be optimistic because the world is in the process of change, and there is, of course, all the progress that is happening in the world of science, and of course, sharing communications at the speed of light, but especially for architecture, we have materials and building materials and techniques that are just fabulous. So thank you very much.